these independent developers and these indie studios that are looking at making a new title that could potentially catch the wind of esports, creating them here on the Isle of Man. If I can craft a narrative and a story to attract them here, because they zero corporation tax, zero capital gains tax, but also just the fact being able to work with these development studios here on the island and say, look, come here, work here. That excites me quite a lot. The other side, I think, is more of the grassroots side of things. So we're doing a lot locally on the grassroots side. There's local tournaments, more and more local tournaments taking place in different titles. So that's great to see this new generation. It does make me feel a little bit old now and again, because I remember when I was sort of 12, 13, going to LAN parties and going to internet cafes, carrying the big computers and big monitors in the back of the car and spending all day there. But it's interesting and exciting to see how that's evolved. So that still excites me.
Exactly. And where do you actually, I know that's all just, predictions, but we can have all our own predictions. So where do you see it's going, all the esports and the video gaming? If you can, what do you think is going to happen like in 10 years?
10 years,
yeah,
right?
5. Okay, I want it to be very futuristic. I want it to be very futuristic. Like let's say 5, because it's very fast emerging industry.
Okay, I can give you 5, and then if there's time, I'll give you 10 as well. So 5 years, I'd say you're going to see more and more brands. Now these are sponsors, these are products getting more and more evolved digitally in the games themselves. This is in-game advertising, controlling characters which are sponsored by a particular brand, maps and weapons and vehicles which are specifically being created by a BMW or by a Monster Energy or Red Bull, a Red Bull energy drink, which is a power up within the game, as an example. I can see more and more brands getting more exposure within the games themselves. Mm-hmm. I think from the competitive side within esports, I think we'll see more and more traditional sports support pathways coming forward. So these are more the nutritionists, the sports psychologists, the coaches that you would normally find in behind the scenes of a rugby team or a football team. I think those guys will become more to the forefront. And they're getting at the moment, if you're in the scene, you know the names of some really good coaches. But I think over the next 4 to 5 years, as players themselves start to retire, so these, the players that we're following now, as they start to retire, you'll either have some that will go down owning their own teams, but you'll have some that will go into coaches. And it's those coaches that I think will become bigger personalities in themselves. And as a younger generation starts to grow up and follow it more, you'll see more of the storylines come to the forefront, the rivalries between the teams, the grudge matches between players that are being coached by, a grandmaster who was, made such a big wave when he was playing pro. And I think you'll see more of that. I'd like to see more from a VR point of view. I say this every time I'm asked this question. But I think the advancements of VR and AR, I hope will start to come to the forefront, and see more and more artists. There was an article I read. There was by a Warner Brothers exec, and he was saying that when they have meetings with their artists, when they bring them into the boardroom, the questions they ask them is not what single you're working on or what album you're working on, is do you play video games? Great. And if you look at number of artists that are starting to step into the video game and esports space just over the last few years, we're going to see more of that, because it's a way for them to connect with their fans in a way that previous generation of artists could never do. So yeah, and I'll see that the Isle of Man will be at the forefront of a location to do esports business. I have to get that in there. That's what I want to see in 10 years' time. Absolutely. Yeah.
So definitely the Isle of Man is gonna be the biggest esports hub. And I'm quite sure I'm quite sure you're gonna get there, because you're very, very active when it comes to the community. And in the end, it's all about that, to be authentic and real and proactive, and everything, comes. But what do you think? Actually, I have to ask you on that. What do you think about the esports betting?
Esports betting. I see the guys that are, if you take, as I said at the start, in my opinion, the three biggest esports betting platforms in the world, Rivalry, Unicorn, and Lookbox, they're all here on the Isle of Man. I see other sportsbook betting platforms taking esports more seriously, seeing that and being aware that if they want to step into the space, they've got to do it with authenticity, as the three of the guys have done. Because if you don't, it will fall flat. Those guys have set the expectation of authenticity so high. I think it is important for the space. So people are always going to bet on the outcome of a sporting event. They always are. So it's important to ensure that there are a regulator like the Isle of Man government can step in and help regulate esports betting platforms. But I think there will be more and more acceptance from the esports space on the importance of building relationships with the betting world. You've got the betting world, which is, the most highly regulated industry on the planet. You've got the esports industry, which is to a large part unregulated. So that there's a lot that the two can learn from each other. They can learn from each other with regards customer and player retention. But I see more and more publishers and developers of the games who maybe 10 years ago were a little bit cautious about being associated with betting operators, understanding the amount of money that they will put into whether or not it's sponsoring a team or sponsoring a tournament ultimately is good for the growth of the industry. The fans want to see teams having more money to grow and to purchase players and to build out of their HQ and take on these coaches and grow their infrastructure. And it's just the same way as if they were to sponsor a football team. Yeah. So I think it's important that the two worlds kind of talk to each other a little bit more. And like you said at the start of this called education. And education is important not just for in the schools, but it's important for different industries. And whether or not that's the betting industry, it's the hospitality industry, that there's industries which need to be educated authentically on the esports ecosystem and how they can bring value into that space.